Hebrew spent almost 1600 years unspoken, used only as a language in the Torah and in Talmudic texts. It was practically a dead language, and yet today it is the native language of millions of speakers, and it's the national language of Israel. There has been no other revival of a language like this. How and why was the creation of modern Hebrew so successful? Efforts to revive Hebrew in literature started in the late 18th and early 19th century with the Haskalah movement, which is known as the Jewish Enlightenment in Central and Eastern Europe. The goals of the movement were both to better integrate Jews into secular culture, but to do so without losing the core of Judaism. The leaders of the movement encouraged Jews to speak the more socially acceptable dialect of German instead of Yiddish, which was the Jewish dialect. But Haskalah leaders also saw the cultivation of Hebrew literature as a vital way of holding on to Jewish identity. They saw Hebrew as the pure Jewish language, and began writing newspapers and literature in Hebrew, and also began trying to turn Hebrew into a spoken language. But it wasn't until later in the 19th century, with the rise of Zionism, that people really started to use Hebrew as a spoken language. Before Hebrew's official revival, in Jerusalem, there were Ashkenazi Jews who spoke Yiddish, which is a combination between German and Hebrew, Sephardic Jews who spoke Ladino, a combination between Spanish and Hebrew, and other Jews who spoke Jewish dialects of Arabic. A pidgin version of Hebrew formed in Jerusalem with Yiddish, Ladino, and Arabic influences. In the 1890s, Theodor Herzl led the Zionist movement, with the goal to re-establish a Jewish homeland in the historic land of Israel. The rise of Zionist ideology coincided with waves of anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe and Yemen, and inspired tens of thousands of Jews to immigrate to Palestine. Many of the immigrants believed that the usage of Hebrew was a crucial element to creating a Jewish state. One such immigrant was Lithuanian-born Eliezer Perelman, who later changed his name to a modern Hebrew name, Eliezer ben Yehuda. Ben Yehuda founded the Committee of Hebrew Language, which worked to fill in the gaps in the Hebrew language to create a complete, usable language. He also worked tirelessly to derive new Hebrew words and wrote the first Hebrew-English dictionary, called Hamachiah, the Reviver. While the committee wanted to keep modern Hebrew as close as possible to biblical Hebrew, they faced a few challenges. First, biblical Hebrew was written in verb, subject, object form. For example, the sentence, Diber ha'ish al Moshe means, spoke the man to Moses. This order was confusing to Yiddish, Ladino, and Arabic speakers, since their languages, like English, were in the subject, verb, object form. So, they would rather say, Ha'ish diber al Moshe, the man spoke to Moses. To avoid the confusion, modern Hebrew would be in subject, verb, object form as well. Another challenge was that there were many words that existed during their time that didn't exist during biblical times. One way Ben Yehuda approached this issue was by giving biblical words new meaning. For example, the modern Hebrew word for electricity, chashmal, meant godly power or energy in biblical Hebrew. And the modern Hebrew word for book is sefer, which meant scroll or parchment in biblical Hebrew. Another challenge was that biblical Hebrew didn't have any punctuation. The only way to tell when one clause started and another ended was through context. This was very impractical, so modern Hebrew adopted modern punctuation, such as periods, commas, and question marks. One thing that was consistent was morphology. Most of the words in both biblical and modern Hebrew are derived from a shoresh, or three-lettered root. For example, the root kaf taf vet is the base for kotev, which means to write, and michtav, which means letter. Modern Hebrew has held on to the three-letter shoresh system. To conclude, the creation of modern Hebrew was so successful because Zionist ideology provided a strong demand for the revival of biblical Hebrew, and because people were willing to make changes to biblical Hebrew that made it practical in modern times. Toda rabah. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
אוי כפרה שלי, אוי כפרה שלי, את כבר לא תהי שלי, בראשי אותה תמונה.